Their extraordinary story spans nearly a century of Jacksonville history, from the Jim Crow era to the present, and their names are synonymous with both activism and achievement. Here to tell us about their new book, Living the Legacy, ahead of an upcoming Juneteenth celebration book signing, are Gwendolyn and Alton Yates. Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
So nice to have you both here. You have been involved in so many pieces of local history, and there are really so many ways into the story of the two of you and the story that you share. But I'm actually going to start in the middle and kind of work our way to the edges. Alton, because one story that is, one of the more powerful ones from your experience is this experimental program that you participated in as a very young man at 19, where you essentially risked your life more than 65 times for the nation's fledgling space travel program.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the volunteer work that you did when you were in the Air Force?
Be more than happy to. When I arrived at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, there was a program ongoing conducted by Colonel John Paul Stapp, who had the distinction of being known as the fastest man on Earth because he had ridden a rocket sled at 632 miles an hour and stopped still in 1 9/10 seconds. And he was in the process of trying to determine the effects of space travel on the human body. He couldn't do that alone, so he needed volunteers. When I arrived, one of the first things I did was volunteer for his program. I read a little bit about him, had heard a little bit about him, but I never thought I would get the opportunity to meet him. And it was just, a chance assignment that I was assigned to the Aeromedical Field Laboratory. And during that period, there was no NASA. There was a civilian organization that was doing the work that later became NASA. And in order to determine what the effects of space travel on the human body would be, Colonel Stapp had designed these high-speed rocket sleds so that we could test G-forces on the body. We volunteers would be strapped into the sled, fired down the track, and of course, we would have all kinds of monitors attached to our body to tell him what was happening. And in addition to using the rocket sleds to test the effects of space travel, we also use those sleds to come up with a seatbelt program that everybody uses all over the world now. We developed seatbelts for automobiles and aircraft. We developed the ejection seats because we knew we were going to be developing high-speed aircraft at a later date, and we had to have a way to get pilots out of those planes if something happened. So we did the test to determine whether or not a man could eject from a high-speed jet by using the high-speed rocket sleds and being ejected from the sled over the New Mexico desert floor. There were probably 15 of us who participated in that program, and there are two survivors, myself and an airman friend whom I talked to just yesterday, whose name is Bobby Teal. We're the only two survivors that we know of right now, and we're just happy to get together in conversation.
And like the fastest man, I mean, you were traveling at these speeds of 600 miles per hour
Yes.
plus and coming to essentially a dead stop. I mean, it must have been kind of an excruciating experience, perhaps an exhilarating experience. What did it feel like physically to be doing that kind of a rigorous stop-start?
Well, it's difficult to explain to someone when you say that it feels like everything in your body was trying to come out through your chest when the sled took off, and when it stopped, you had the opposite effect where it seems as though everything in your body was trying to go out through your back. It was a crushing feeling, and just before, I think probably my third ride when I passed out for the first time, I I felt this sensation that I was flying, and I could not have been flying because I was tightly strapped into this seat on the sled. But I don't know, for some reason I had that sensation. And of course, later on, there were pressure suits that were designed to prevent a pilot from having that feeling or an astronaut from getting that feeling if they were flying into space.
An extraordinary experience and one that, future, space travelers really owe a debt to you for kind of, you know, going through that rigorous training. Um, you both had a chance to leave Jacksonville. Alton, you went to, New Mexico. Gwen, you used to leave, I think, annually for some vacations up north. Um, and, in some ways, those excursions for both of you made it almost harder to return home. Can you kind of
Mm.
explain what your experience was when you would leave and then return to Jacksonville, your hometown?
Absolutely. My grandparents raised me, so I lived here with them. And my mom and my mom lived in Connecticut. And when I was a teenager, she was at Bridgeport Hospital. That was one of the places that I met lots of friends that did not look like me. And of course, coming from the South, it at first it was odd, but they were friendly. We were friends. We would work together. We helped each other at the hospitals. And then when we got off from work, the kids would say, I say kids, teenagers, they'd say, "Well, come on, let's go down to Seaside Park and get some food and stretch out on the lawn down there." And that's what we did. And they didn't look like me. And this was something very different that I had experienced at home. But every summer when we were working together, we always had so much fun. And then I'd come back to the South where you had the colored water fountains and the colored bathrooms, and we didn't have that kind of uh, togetherness.
So this was an experience that you would have. You'd leave, you'd return. Did you ever think about not returning? Was that an option? And kind of how did you balance the experiences that you were having, those two very different kind of north and south?
Well, you just sort of knew where your quotes unquote place was when you were in the South. My grandparents were very, very strict with you do what you're expected to do. You go to the restroom where you're supposed to go. You go to the water fountain where you're supposed to go to. And it was, I guess it was really just kind of strange that you would come back to that after living a different kind of life in Connecticut.
And so that experience, did it change the way that you felt about Jacksonville? Did it change the way that you experienced the racism, and the realities of the Jim Crow South?
Mm.
Uh, it just let me know, as even as young as I was, that there was a different kind of life. Um, my grandparents were very, very close. They were like my parents, and so I never really wanted to leave them. But I did want things to change, even as a teenager. It was not that easy coming back and going back and seeing the differences and wondering, why is it so different here? Why is it that I can go into a hat shop and I couldn't try on hats? Uh, Other people who didn't look like me could try on hats, but I couldn't. I just had to take it, and if I got home and I didn't like it or it didn't match something, that was just too bad. I couldn't return it. But you got to learn to live that way. And my grandparents were, of course, that was the only thing that they knew, and so they were very, very protective of me.
Mhm.
And so they would constantly tell you what you couldn't do and what you could do.
Now, Alton, when he returned to Jacksonville, um, was very much involved in activism, and I do wanna get to kind of how that began and the work that you did, but I'm curious, Gwen, when you started dating and when you, started, having a relationship, Was that concerning to you? Was it scary, the work that he was doing? Did you find yourself drawn to it yourself?
Well, actually, he didn't tell me. I didn't know anything about what he was doing. He didn't share that with me at all. And he wrote me letters every day. I thought he was writing them every day. He would write a stack of them and then have them send them out to me, so I got them every day. But I didn't know what he was doing. And actually, I was in Lily's drugstore, uh, looking at get to buy something, and I saw this magazine that had Sidney Poitier and his wife on it. And so I was really interested in seeing them. So I picked up the magazine and I looked in it. And as I was flipping, I saw Yates. Well, you're not dating a guy. If you see Yates, you're gonna check it out. And I thought, God, that's my Alton. And I had no idea what he was doing.
For people who don't know, remind us what that article was.
Well, it was Sidney Poitier. You're talking about that article.
It was
got my attention.
Yeah, it was that issue, right, that got your attention. But the article inside, what was it about?
Well, the article that I ended up reading
Yeah.
was the article about my husband. It's about my boyfriend then,
And about the work he was doing.
And the first thing I saw was GI risked death 65 times for science. I was scared to death, and scared but proud because that Ebony magazine was a really great book for people of color. We just learned so much. And when I flipped through it and I saw it, I I grabbed my purse, looked at it to see if I had it, the 35 cents, so that I could buy it, and I bought two of them. I had enough to do that, and I raced home to my grandparents to let them see what uh, my future husband was doing.
Pretty proud. And so you hadn't told her about that at all, and she learned about it reading Ebony.
Yeah, well, all those experiments we were doing were top secret at the time. We couldn't tell anybody. And I told her when I finally was able to tell her, I said, every morning when I got up and went to work, the first thing you drove past was a big sign that say, what you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. That meant nothing that you did at that laboratory got outside the gates of that laboratory. So you just couldn't talk about those kinds of things. When the Air Force allowed Ebony to come in and shoot the pictures, it was long after we had declassified a lot of the information. Much of what we really did, though, was never told in that magazine article.
And have you since talked about it?
Oh, yes, I've talked to her quite a bit about it because I had to assure her that, my brain was not completely non-functional. I mean, I had an idea of what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I often tell her now that if given the opportunity, I would do it all over again. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that took the place of the kind of experiments that we were doing at that time, and nothing else could take the place. If we were going to advance in the space program, and Russia had gotten ahead of us, but if we were going to advance, catch up, overtake them as we did, and put a man on the moon, those kinds of things had to happen first. And I was just proud to be a part of that.
Yeah. And that was, a real point of pride for you. And then you had this story of your return to Jacksonville after the program, after you were, I guess you retired, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually, it was the reason I retired. I'd gotten word that my dad was seriously ill. My mother passed away when we were in high school, and there were 7 of us children. So my dad was left to try to raise, 7 children on his own. And when I got word that he was terminally ill, then I had to give up my career and come home because, he wanted me to take care of my siblings. And there was nothing else on earth that I would have rather be doing than, of course, taking care of my brothers and sisters if anything happened to my father. On the drive home from Alamogordo, New Mexico, I stopped into a restaurant after I'd gassed my car up to get gas. I had sense enough to wear my uniform while I was driving home because I was driving alone. And when I went into that restaurant to, after gassing the car up to have food, these big guys walked up behind me and used the N word and all kinds of vile language and told me if I didn't get my black so and so out of there, I would never wind up wherever it was I was going. Well, now, when you consider the fact that for the past 4.5 years, I lived in an atmosphere where if no one ever thought race, saw color, we were all one great big family. And just the kind of problems that were taking place in the South were nowhere to be seen at Holloman Air Force Base or in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So I continued my drive home, but in order to eat, I bought a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. And I ate peanut butter and bread all the way home. As I was driving through and got close to the border between Mississippi and I think Texas, whatever that was, there was a big billboard erected by the side of the road, and it had the picture of black men hanging on it, and there was a sign that said, erected by the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And it had in big bold letters, using the N words, don't let the sun set on you in this county. Well, I wasn't, I mean, it's hard for me to explain exactly how I felt at that time. I wasn't scared. Fear, I don't think, never entered my mind. I think the thing that entered my mind most was getting home safely. And I made up my mind at that time that when I got home, if I got home, I would do everything in my power to try to change those kinds of conditions. I wanted people of color to be able to enjoy the kind of life that I enjoyed without prejudice and segregation and discrimination. And I had enjoyed that for 4.5 years in the Air Force. And I thought if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere in the world. And I wanted to make it happen in Jacksonville.
And so you did, when you returned, you were involved in the Youth Council of the NAACP. You helped organize sit-ins and demonstrations. You
Yes.
were actually present and injured on
Yes.
Axe Handle Saturday.
On Axe Handle Saturday, which was August 27th, 1960, we actually were originally supposed to demonstrate at Woolworth. We saw all of these men gathered around Hemming Plaza with Confederate flags and passing out axe handles and baseball bats from the back of a truck. So we changed and decided we would go to the Woolworth store. Well, as we took off from Laura Street Presbyterian Church, headed toward the W.T. Grant store, which was on Main Street, we were spotted. And when they spotted us, they charged toward the kids with these baseball bats and axe handles, and kids scattered in every direction. Well, me and a group of about 8 went the opposite direction and was able to go through the J.C. Penney store and into the Woolworth store. And just as we sat down at the counter, guys came into that store with the axe handles and started beating us with axe handles. Well, I got hit in the back of the head. I was able to get the kids out of Woolworth and into the side door of Snyder Memorial Church. That church is not open on Saturday mornings, but the cleaning crew was in there and the side door was unlocked, and we were able to get into that side door, and that's what kept us safe.
Wow. Were those moments that you were aware of the work that he was doing? Were you also part of those efforts, Gwendolyn?
He did not allow me to be a part of those experiences, which was very difficult because if you're home and you don't have, you don't have a television, you don't have a phone, you don't have any way of communicating with each other. You wonder what happened. You wonder where they are. You wonder if he's okay. And we had been just recently married. We got married on August the 19th, his birthday. and
And this was the
and this was
27th.
right, yes, right after that. And I was in an apartment and I was afraid. I didn't have a telephone. Just wondering where he was and what was happening to him and not knowing whether or not he was going to come back to the apartment alive or dead. And it was very, very difficult. Um, just even now thinking back of how I felt then, it was really scary. And being a new bride, not knowing if you're going to be a new widow is terrifying.
Did you know how frightening that was for her, Alton?
Well, I had an idea, but the the main problem that I had with having her being involved was the fact, number one, that she had two children to take care of. They weren't, I mean, they were my brother and sister, but Gwen was raising them, helping me to raise them. And the both of us couldn't be away from them at the same time. So I wanted her to be there with the children to keep them safe. We never knew at any of these demonstrations whether or not we would be attacked. We were alerted to the possibility that we would be attacked at the August 27th demonstration. Stetson Kennedy, who had done some work with the FBI, but who had also secretly infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, told us that there was a good possibility that some of the Klansmen were going to try to break up the demonstration. So there was that possibility, and I certainly didn't want my wife and my baby brother and sister to experience that.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Gwen and Alton Yates about their new memoir called Living the Legacy, and also their experiences here and their life of activism and achievement in Jacksonville. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. In addition to the activism that you participated in, you both also worked inside of government. The two of you worked for four mayors, Hans Tansler, Jake Godbold, Tommy Hazzuri at Austin. Gwen, you also served as a city council member for two terms in the late 90s and early 2000s. How was it different working inside the city government versus kind of, approaching and protesting and working from the outside?
I think what you felt like we had an opportunity to make some changes, little changes in our little part of the world, and being able to work with the mayors, you were able to explain some things with them, and of course by that time things had changed quite a bit. So we had a great opportunity to do some things in city government. And it just seemed kind of fall in your lap. Things just sort of happened. I started off working with children who were in the youth detention center and had an experience. Two girls came to my office. They were brought to my office, and they sat there and they said to me, why are we being treated like this? We went to a policeman for help, and the policeman's brought us here, and now we're locked up with kids who are in here with, major offenses.
These girls were runaways?
They were runaways. They were from Missouri, and they had been picked up by some guys that stopped them. They put their books on the side of the road, got in the car. These guys told them that they were looking for movie stars, and they brought them to Jacksonville. And Jacksonville had, I guess, an underground kind of operation going on with girls. And so they had run away from the place. They got finally and asked the policeman if he would help them, and they were locked up. And those two girls sat in my office. I was a counselor at the time. And they said, why are we being treated like this? And I felt, that no answer I could give them would be adequate other than you're here because we have nowhere else to place you until your parents can collect you. And the inside of me just felt so terrible. What could I do? We needed a place where children who had made the mistake of running away would have somewhere to go. And that put me on another track of my career in starting the Youth Crisis, what is now known as the Youth Crisis Center.
That's right. And that's an organization that is now, I think, in its almost 60.
Oh, yes.
60 years of
That's
the Youth
right.
Crisis Center. I mean, that is an
That's
extraordinary
right.
accomplishment. And it is expanded its mission. It is not just runaways. It now helps families.
Oh, yes.
But it
Yes.
became a model for the state in terms of how to handle, instead of just
Absolutely.
putting children in a punitive environment.
Mhm.
And of course, there's all kinds of questions about that as well. But for people who would specifically run away from home, a resource for them.
Right. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest experiences that I had, that finally I had, was when I got a call from CBS's 60 Minutes. And the producer said that they'd heard about our program and they wanted to come to Jacksonville and see about it. And I said, well, sure, come on. So he came, and I mean, they were very, very strict. They would not do anything that was not actually happening. They sit there for hours waiting for a call or waiting for a parent to come and pick up the children. And so finally, when Harry Moses left, I told the staff, I said, well, he said he's going up to look at another program that's been in operation for 5 years, and we were very, very young at that time as a program. And I said, we probably will never hear from him again. Well, after some consideration, I guess he called us back and he says, we've been to that program. They have nothing to compare to what you have in Jacksonville, and we want to do the story there. And I said, great. And then he said, we'll need a helicopter so that they could, shoot, I guess, from the air coming into to Jacksonville. And they said, can you get it? And I go, sure. And when he finally hung up, I turned to the staff who were so excited, and I said, he needs me to get a helicopter. Where the hell am I going to get a helicopter from? And they looked at me and they said, you'll figure it out. And I did.
You did. We've got an email from Patrina. She says, thank you for the guest you have on today. The gentleman that was in the Air Force who experienced racism when he came back to the South. Thank you for allowing to tell him his story. His story was raw and one I've never heard before. Again, thank you for sharing his story of triumph. I do want to, again, mention the book. I'm going to hold it up here for the folks that are watching our stream. It's called Living the Legacy. It is a memoir of Alton and Gwen Yates. They're going to actually be doing a book signing at the Juneteenth event at Episcopal Cathedral, at St. John's Episcopal Cathedral on Church Street. That's at 5 o'clock on June 14th. So this coming Saturday. It is such a pleasure to talk to you, Alton Yates, Gwendolyn Yates. Thank you so much for being on today.
Oh,
Thank you so
you're
much.
so
We
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.